Okay, neurobiology. If you take a look at this dizygotic, the concordance right here for males, one kid has ADHD, only 35% of the other twins do. With males, it's higher number than with females. Okay, with monozygotic identical twins, very high concordance rate. You know, and so this, I mean, this is the kind of data that you look at that really is strongly suggestive of a genetic basis to this. Okay, and parents, if they have ADHD, what's the risk of their child developing ADHD? It's 35%. There are some minor structural abnormalities seen. I'm going to call them kids, but let's assume that that always means also teenagers and adults. Okay, the degree to which this is important in the behavioral pathology is not really clear, but these are relatively subtle problems with brain structure. What's been found across a number of studies, and everything points in the same direction, is frontal lobe dysfunction. And it doesn't have to do with brain damage per se. Again, it doesn't look like there's any signs of brain lesions or gross abnormalities in structure of the brain, but it's decreased dopamine. Dopamine plays a critical role in activating the frontal lobes. Now, dopamine's working in other parts of the brain, okay, but not in the frontal lobes for some reason. Okay, and so this has been measured in a bunch of different ways, looking at blood flow, decreased blood flow in frontal lobes, glucose metabolism, looking at things like PET and SPECT scans, functional MRIs, so on and so forth. Decreased spinal fluid levels of dopamine found, dopamine metabolites found in spinal fluid. All the stuff just really basically, you know, points in the same direction. There's just not enough dopamine activity. And every drug that works to treat ADHD has one common denominator, and that is it increases dopamine. All the stimulants are dopamine reuptake inhibitors. This is what you see across many studies, is that if you just do a SPECT or PET scan when somebody's at rest, it's not as pronounced. But if you get a baseline metabolic brain scan, okay, and then you have the person come in like the next day or the next week, and you challenge them to do kind of a difficult task, okay, that involves abstract thinking and attention and so forth, and then you pop them in the PET scanner. That's when you really see a big difference, where over here there's normal activity in frontal lobes following engagement in a complex problem-solving task, and over here with ADHD, more so in the left hemisphere, there's decreased activity in left frontal lobe, but to some degree in the right, and also some decreased metabolic activity in the left hemisphere kind of in general. Frontal lobe symptoms, impulsivity, temporal myopia. Russ Barkley is probably the preeminent researcher in ADHD in the world, and I think he coined this term. This is nearsightedness for time. And you can get kids, adults, teenagers have ADHD, and especially you just look at people that are very bright. I mean, some of these kids, you have an IQ 130. They're very, very bright cognitively, but they really have a problem kind of judging how much time it takes to get something done. Okay, their ability to kind of intuitively know. Now, let me give you two examples of this. Okay, one example is, okay, I've got a term paper due in 3 weeks, and so, you know, most of us, you know, undergraduates, I mean, some people procrastinate, okay, but people keep in mind, yeah, you know, 3 weeks, okay, I've got to keep a watch on this and maybe start working on this. But here you got incredibly bright people that it's like a day or two before go, oh my God, you know, I haven't really even started this yet. But it also is daily stuff. And I've seen this when adults have ADHD, and they've got to get to a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, on a Saturday or something like this. And okay, so they think, okay, well, I could probably get up. I'll get up 7:30, but they don't judge it. You know, and you really, I mean, showing up for, you know, parties, for getting to your airplane on time, again and again and again, they can't really judge it, and they're chronically late. Okay, and then people blame them of being procrastinators. And Barkley says there are people that procrastinate, but that's not what's going on here. They have a real specific cognitive deficit in judging the amount of time. He calls it the event horizon as you're moving towards you know, that term paper, or, you know, getting to work on time, or what have you, okay? Impaired self-monitoring and deficiencies in intrinsic motivation. Now, this last one I think is very, very important and also interesting. These kids are supposed to have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Barkley says they don't have attention problems. They have motivation problems. And here's the deal. You can administer, there are different versions of this, but these tests that require sustained attention and concentration, and usually they're, you know, they're on a computer, and you have to track things and for 15 or 20 minutes, and it's really boring to do. And these kids and teenagers, they do horrible on this test unless you do one thing. If the researcher sits there and says, okay, now I'm going to have you do this test, it takes 20 minutes, and it's really boring. You got to really pay attention. But here's the deal, and that is, if you stay focused on this every minute, I'm going to give you $1. Every minute that you stay with, I'll give you $1. And their scores are just completely normal, okay? This is why these kids show marked behavioral differences in school versus at home, for instance. This kid can't pay attention in school for 30 seconds, and he goes home and stays riveted to a Nintendo game for 3 hours. It drives their parents crazy. Parents say, wait a minute, he pays close attention. You know, he can pay attention. Here's the problem. Intrinsic motivation, the ability to internally will yourself to stay focused on something that is tedious or boring. And let's face it, there's a lot of school, you know, that kind of fits in that category. I don't want to offend educators when I say that, including myself. But you know, you give them something that's interesting, and they can attend just as well as anybody else. He says, so this is a motivational problem. And guess what? Dopamine is a key player in motivation. Okay? Now, in contrast, the so-called inattentive subtype, which is going to get, the name's going to get changed. These kids got a real hardwired cognitive problem with information processing and attention. And you can sit there with these kids and say, every minute you stay focused on, I'm going to give you a $5 bill, and they still can't do it. Okay? So that's how these kids are real different. The other thing I want to mention, which is interesting and clinically relevant too, is that in situations that are inherently exciting, interesting, they can attend. Okay, but the other situation is if they're in a novel situation where they might feel scared or anxious. Oftentimes, you don't see a lot of the symptoms emerge. So here's classically what happens, and in our society, it's almost always mom that takes these kids in to see a pediatrician. Mother comes in with little Johnny. He's 7 years old, and he's driving everybody crazy, and he's hyperactive. And you know, Johnny's sitting there, and the pediatrician comes in, and oh, doctor, you know, my kid's he has ADHD. You know, I watched Oprah the other day. He's got a classic case of this. You know, and he's just driving us nuts. He can't sit still. He makes all these weird noises, you know. He's bugging the hell out of his sister and all this kind of stuff. And this little kid is sitting over there like this. And mom said, show him. And this kid, you know, like this. And so, now I'm kind of making this part up, but doctor says, you look okay to me. Here's some Xanax for you. You know, don't believe everything you hear on Oprah, and have a nice day. And then you go out, and then, you know, 5 minutes later in the car, this kid's sitting in the back seat and just bouncing off the walls, you know? Okay, so what we're looking at here are context-dependent symptoms. You can see the hyperactivity, difficulties with self-control really manifest in situations where kids are bored, okay? Now, with the most severe end of the continuum, extraordinary severe ADHD, then you'll see across situations. But most kids, what I just said is true.